What if your brain is lying to you? Not maliciously, not cruelly, but to keep you alive. Because meaning, the very thing you chase through long nights and quiet doubts, through books and gurus and desperate prayers, is not something you discover buried in the world like treasure waiting beneath the earth. It is something your brain builds, constructs, fabricates. Meaning is the most beautiful lie evolution ever invented. A neurological illusion so convincing, so necessary, that without it you would simply stop moving, stop choosing, stop being. And once you understand how that lie is made, neuron by neuron, story by story, chemical by chemical, you will stop searching for purpose in the external world and start engineering it from within. This is not philosophy for poets. This is neuroscience for the lost. Psychology for those who have looked into the void and found it staring back. Let's descend. The illusion engine. How your brain turns chaos into coherence. Your brain did not evolve to perceive reality accurately. It evolved to survive reality. And survival, in a world of predators, scarcity, uncertainty, and infinite sensory noise, required one critical evolutionary skill: the ability to create patterns where none exist, to see meaning in randomness, to build narratives from fragments, to connect the unconnected until the chaos becomes coherent, until the storm becomes a story you can navigate. This is what neuroscientists call apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful connections between unrelated things, faces in clouds, constellations in scattered stars, fate in coincidence. And while it sounds like a cognitive flaw, a bug in the system, it is in fact your brain's most profound survival mechanism. Because a brain that sees patterns, even false ones, is a brain that anticipates, that plans, that projects into the future and prepares for what might come next. And a brain that projects into the future needs purpose. Here is where it gets fascinating, where biology becomes philosophy without either side realizing it. Purpose is not some metaphysical truth waiting to be unearthed in mountaintop monasteries or ayahuasca ceremonies. Purpose is a neurological construct generated primarily by the dopaminergic circuits deep in your midbrain, in structures like the ventral tegmental area and the nucleus accumbens. Dopamine, often misunderstood as the pleasure chemical or the reward molecule, is actually the neurotransmitter of anticipation, of goal-directed behavior. It is the chemical signature of desire, pursuit, and forward motion. When you set a goal, no matter how small or grand, your brain releases dopamine, not when you achieve it, but when you move toward it. The pursuit itself becomes the reward. The brain doesn't care if the goal is noble, trivial, sacred, or absurd. It only cares that there is a goal, that there is something pulling you into tomorrow. This is why people who lose all sense of direction, who have no projects, no ambitions, no forward motion, often fall into what we clinically call depression. Not because life is objectively meaningless, but because their dopamine system has nothing to predict, nothing to anticipate, nothing to pull them out of bed. Depression, in this neurological sense, is the collapse of narrative structure. It is the brain starved of anticipated futures. It is what happens when the illusion engine breaks down and you are left staring at raw existence without the filter of meaning. Carl Jung understood this intuitively, long before neuroscience could measure dopamine or map the prefrontal cortex. He spoke of the self, not as a fixed identity, but as an organizing principle, a psychological center of gravity that pulls fragmented experiences into coherence, into a sense of continuity across time. The self, Jung argued, is what makes you feel like a unified being moving through time rather than a collection of disconnected moments. It is the author of your inner story, the narrator that whispers this happened because of that, and therefore I must do this next. And when that author goes silent, when the self can no longer weave meaning from experience, you are left with what Jung called psychic disintegration, the collapse of the center, the scattering of the pieces. In other words, your brain creates purpose to keep itself whole. Without it, you fracture, you drift, you become a series of disconnected sensations with no through line, no plot, no reason to continue turning the page. So the question is not whether you should seek meaning. Evolution has already decided that for you. The question is, how do you feed the machine that generates it? How do you consciously manipulate the illusion engine so that it produces a life worth living? That is what we are here to discover. The narrative virus. Why stories hijack your purpose centers. Stories are older than cities, older than agriculture, older than the wheel, older than written language, older than gods carved in stone. Long before humans built temples or empires or stock markets, we sat around fires in the dark and told each other tales. Not for entertainment, though that was part of it, but for instruction, for cohesion, for passing down the knowledge of what works, what kills, what transforms, for survival. And in doing so, over tens of thousands of years, we rewired our brains. We became a species shaped by narrative. Homo narrans, the storytelling animal. Neuroscience now shows that when you hear a story, when someone tells you about a hero who ventures into darkness and returns transformed, your brain doesn't just passively receive information like a hard drive accepting data. It simulates the experience. Mirror neurons fire as if you are the hero facing the dragon. Emotional centers in the amygdala and insula activate as if you are feeling the fear, the triumph, the loss. Your motor cortex subtly prepares movements as if you are swinging the sword or climbing the mountain. In essence, stories hijack your neural machinery. They make you live lives you've never lived, learn lessons you've never experienced firsthand, and integrate archetypes you've never consciously encountered. This is not a metaphor. This is measurable brain activity. Narrative is a virus that reprograms consciousness. And this is why myth is so powerful, why it endures across centuries and continents. Jung called these recurring story patterns archetypes, universal symbols embedded in what he termed the collective unconscious, the hero, the shadow, the wise old man, the great mother, the trickster, the journey into the underworld. These are not just characters in dusty books. They are neurological templates, frameworks your brain uses to make sense of existence, to categorize experience, to navigate the chaos of being human. When you hear the story of a hero who descends into darkness, who faces their demons, who dies symbolically and is reborn with new knowledge, your brain doesn't just understand it intellectually. It recognizes it, because that is the structure of individuation, Jung's term for the psychological journey toward wholeness, the integration of shadow and light, the confrontation with what you have repressed, the transformation that comes only through voluntary suffering. And here is the key insight, the one that changes everything. Your brain treats your own life as a story. Every decision you make, every hardship you endure, every fork in the road, your brain is unconsciously asking, what kind of story is this? What role am I playing? Where is this plot going? Am I the hero in training? The victim of circumstance? The wanderer without direction? The fool who stumbles into wisdom? The martyr? The tyrant? The sage? And depending on the story you believe you are living, depending on which archetype you unconsciously embody, your brain generates corresponding emotions, motivations, interpretations, and sense of purpose. If you see yourself as a victim, your brain will search for evidence of persecution, of injustice, of betrayal. It will filter reality through that lens and confirm the narrative again and again. If you see yourself as a hero in training, your brain will reframe obstacles as trials, setbacks as tests, suffering as the price of transformation. Same events, different story, different meaning. This is why people who survive horrific trauma with their sense of purpose intact often speak in mythic terms without realizing it. They say things like, I was broken down so I could be rebuilt stronger. Or, I had to descend into hell to discover who I really am. They are not being poetic. They are revealing the narrative virus at work, the way their brain took raw, senseless suffering and wove it into a redemptive arc, a hero's journey that makes the pain mean something. Because a brain with a story, even a tragic one, can endure almost anything. A brain without one, a brain stuck in randomness with no plot and no character arc, collapses under the weight of existence. So, if meaning is narrative and narrative is constructed, then the most powerful question you can ask yourself is not, what is my purpose? What does the universe want from me? but rather, what story am I telling myself about my life? And is it a story worth living? Because if it's not, you can rewrite it. That is the secret. That is the power. Trick the system. How to consciously feed your brain purpose signals. Now that you understand the mechanism, the architecture, the system behind meaning, the question becomes intensely practical. How do you use this knowledge? How do you stop waiting passively for purpose to arrive like lightning from the gods and start engineering it with precision, intention, and ruthless clarity? The answer lies in understanding one simple truth. Your brain doesn't distinguish between real meaning and constructed meaning. It has no ontological detector. It only responds to signals, to patterns, to neurochemical feedback loops. And if you can control the signals, you can control the sense of purpose. Let's break this down into 3 core strategies. First, micro goals and dopamine feeding. Remember, dopamine is not released when you achieve. It is released when you anticipate achievement, when you sense forward motion, when you believe you are closing the gap between where you are and where you want to be. This means your brain craves momentum, not distant milestones. If you set a goal too far in the future, write a novel, build a company, find my calling, your brain receives no immediate dopamine hit. The goal is too abstract, too delayed, too disconnected from today's actions, and so it disengages. It loses interest. It wanders back to TikTok or Netflix, because those provide immediate, predictable rewards. But if you break that massive goal into micro targets, today I write 200 words. Today I make 1 phone call. Today I research for 10 focused minutes. Your brain gets daily hits of anticipation and completion, small wins, visible progress, momentum. And momentum, not motivation, is what sustains purpose over months and years. This is why truly disciplined people, the ones who seem to have inhuman consistency, do not rely on inspiration or willpower. They rely on micro loops of progress that feed the dopamine system day after day, tricking the brain into believing it is always moving towards something meaningful. Second, visual symbolism and ritual anchoring. Jung understood something that modern productivity culture has forgotten. The unconscious mind does not speak in words or logic or spreadsheets. It speaks in symbols. This is why religious and spiritual traditions across every culture use icons, altars, candles, robes, chants, sacred spaces. Not because they are superstitious or naive, but because symbols anchor meaning in the nervous system far more powerfully than abstract concepts ever could. You can use this same mechanism. Create a physical space, a desk, a corner of your room, a wall that represents your purpose. Place objects there that symbolize your goals, your identity, your story. A book you want to write, a photo of who you want to become, a single word written on paper that encapsulates your myth. Every time you interact with that space, your brain encodes the ritual as significant. It begins to associate that environment with transformation, with identity, with becoming. Rituals are not silly. Rituals are neurological triggers that bypass conscious resistance and speak directly to the pattern-seeking, symbol-hungry unconscious. Light a candle before you work. Always use the same pen. Wear the same jacket. It sounds trivial, but these anchors tell your brain, this is not ordinary time. This is sacred time. This is when I become who I am trying to become. Third, self-authored narrative, or what Nietzsche called, become who you are. Nietzsche, like Jung, understood that identity is not discovered lying dormant inside you like a fossil waiting to be excavated. Identity is created, forged, authored. He urged individuals to become the poets of their own lives, to stop living according to inherited scripts, cultural defaults, parental expectations, or the comfortable lies of mediocrity, and instead, to write their own myths. This requires brutal, unflinching honesty. You must sit down and ask yourself, what is the story I have been living unconsciously up until this moment? Am I living my parents' unlived dreams? Society's narrow script of success? A story of fear, resentment, or avoidance? A story where I am always the victim, always waiting for permission, always sabotaging myself before the world can reject me? Be ruthless. Write it down. See it clearly. And then ask, What story do I want to live instead? Not what sounds noble to others, not what would impress strangers on social media, but what story, if you lived it fully, committed to it completely, would make you feel like your existence mattered, like you had played your part well, like you had honored the strange and singular gift of consciousness. Write it down, make it explicit, give it structure, a beginning, a conflict, a transformation, a resolution, because once your brain has a narrative to follow, a hero's journey with your name on it, it will generate the purpose, the motivation, the discipline, the resilience to see it through. This is the ultimate trick. You are both the author and the character. Write better, become better. The Purpose Experiment. Practical re-engineering in 4 steps. Let us now synthesize everything into a clear, actionable framework. Not theory, not inspiration, but a method you can begin today, not next year, not after you feel ready or healed or worthy. Now, step 1, identify the false meanings. Most people, if they are honest, are living purposes they never consciously chose. They inherited them from parents, absorbed them from culture, adopted them out of fear or ego, or the desperate need to belong. You must excavate this. Sit in silence, without distraction, without your phone, and ask, why do I want what I say I want? Do I want wealth because I care about freedom, or because I am terrified of being seen as a failure? Do I want a relationship because I genuinely desire intimacy, or because I am afraid of loneliness, of being unwanted? Do I want success because I am building something meaningful, or because I am trying to prove something to people whose opinions I secretly despise? This is painful work. Most people never do it. They live entire lives chasing ghosts, performing for audiences that don't even exist. Jung warned of this endlessly, the danger of living a persona, a mask designed to please others, to fit in, to avoid conflict, while the true self, the authentic core, starves and withers in shadow. Strip away what is not yours. What remains, however small, however strange, however unmarketable, that is the signal worth amplifying. Step 2. Create an intentional myth. Now that you know what is real, what is truly yours, give it story, give it shape. Do not write vague aspirations like, I want to be successful, or I want to make a difference. That is empty, generic. Your brain cannot visualize it, cannot embody it, cannot become it. Instead, write something like this. I am someone who builds things that last. I am the architect of my own resilience. Every failure is not evidence of weakness, but a stone in the foundation of what I am becoming. Every small win is proof that I am capable of more than I believed. I do not wait for permission. I do not collapse at the first sign of resistance. I am the hero of my own myth. And this is the chapter where I transform. See the difference? One is a wish. The other is mythic identity, a narrative your brain can embody, simulate, rehearse, and eventually believe. Write your myth in present tense. Make it visceral. Make it real to your nervous system, as real as hunger or fear or desire. Step 3. Anchor it in daily ritual. Meaning evaporates without reinforcement. The brain forgets. The illusion engine needs constant fuel. Every morning, before the chaos of the day begins, read your myth aloud. Look at your symbolic space. Spend 2 minutes visualizing yourself as that person, living that story, making the choices that character would make. This is not manifestation nonsense. This is neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to rewire itself through repeated mental rehearsal. Athletes use this. Surgeons use this. Anyone who performs at a high level under pressure uses this. You are not pretending. You are not faking it. You are training your brain to recognize a new pattern, a new identity, a new story, until it becomes automatic, until it becomes you. Step 4. Measure movement, not outcomes. Purpose dies when you tie it exclusively to distant results, to external validation, to the approval of others. Instead, measure whether you moved toward your myth today. Did you write 1 page? Did you take 1 risk? Did you choose courage over comfort, even in some small, invisible way? These are votes of identity. Each one tells your brain, I am the kind of person who does this, even when it's hard, even when no one is watching. And over time, the brain stops resisting. The new story becomes the default story, not because the universe rewarded you with a miracle, but because you built it, neuron by neuron, ritual by ritual, choice by choice. The shadow of purpose, when meaning becomes a trap. But there is a danger here, one that Jung would insist we confront before we go any further. Purpose, when rigidly held, when fused too tightly with ego, when defended against all doubt or evolution, can become a prison. Because if your identity is entirely bound to a single story, a single goal, a single vision of who you must become, then any deviation, any failure, any change in direction feels like death. You become brittle, defensive, fanatical, unable to adapt when life inevitably throws chaos at your carefully constructed narrative. This is the shadow side of purpose, the tyranny of a singular narrative. Jung spoke often of the necessity of holding opposites, of embracing paradox, of learning to sit with contradiction without collapsing into simplistic certainty. The self, he argued, is not fixed. It is dynamic, a living process constantly integrating new experiences, new insights, new layers of shadow and light. So while you must build purpose intentionally, you must also hold it loosely. You must be willing to let the story evolve, to recognize when a chapter ends, to allow the myth to transform without clinging desperately to the version of yourself that no longer fits the life you are actually living. Because the brain that generates meaning is the same brain that must let meaning die and be reborn. This is the ultimate wisdom, the hardest lesson. Purpose is not permanent, it is alive. And like all living things, it must grow, change, and sometimes dissolve entirely, so that something deeper, truer, stranger can emerge from the ashes. Do not fear that dissolution. That is not the loss of meaning. That is the death of illusion, the shedding of a skin that no longer fits. And beyond it, if you are brave enough to keep building, to keep authoring, to keep becoming, lies a truer, more authentic purpose than you could have invented at the start. Resolution. The architect and the architect's dream. So here we are, at the end of the labyrinth, at the edge of the mirror, at the place where the seeker and the sought dissolve into one. And what have we learned? That meaning is not found, it is forged. That your brain is not a passive observer waiting for purpose to reveal itself in burning bushes or cosmic signs. It is an engine of illusion, constantly building coherence from chaos, narrative from noise, identity from action. And that once you understand this, once you see the machinery behind the curtain, you are no longer at the mercy of circumstance, or fate, or the cruelty of a random universe. You become the architect, not of reality itself, but of how reality is interpreted. And that, in the end, is all that matters. Because two people can live the same life, face the same trials, endure the same losses, walk the same roads, and one will see meaninglessness, emptiness, proof that nothing matters, while the other sees myth, transformation, the hero's journey. The difference is not in what happens. The difference is in the story they tell about what happens. So stop waiting for the universe to hand you purpose on a silver platter. Stop searching endlessly for signs, for permission, for proof that you matter before you dare to act as if you do. You matter because you decide to act as if you do. You matter because you feed your brain the signals, the rituals, the micro-goals, the symbols that generate meaning. You matter because you are both the author and the character, and every single day, you choose which story to continue writing. Purpose is not found in monasteries or mushroom trips or self-help books. Purpose is built, neuron by neuron, ritual by ritual, choice by choice. And now you know how. The illusion engine is yours to command. Use it wisely.